guess why we're here today for Media Democracy Day, but it's harder now to make those connections, to actually, for us as activists, and I include myself in that, to actually have influence over what the mainstream media do.
All right, thank you very much, Libby. So I really wanted to thank all three of the panelists for sharing a story. I know as myself as a woman who's been in politics now for a while, I think there's so much power in sharing stories and you know, connecting to this story that we all share around the way the world is, but it is a very vulnerable place to be as a politician when you're not speaking about facts and figures and policies and all these pieces and sharing how you felt about something. So thank you for all that. And it does lead to my next question, which Libby kind of gave me a great intro for, around women in politics, and particularly women in the media in politics. So hard to resist the temptation when all four of us here, and this panel was not chosen by gender, but as it happens, we have 4 women, a moderator and 3 panelists. So I'm curious as to your thoughts about whether you feel that the media do treat women differently than men, both in the political realm, but I know all 3 of you had active lives before getting into politics, so if you want to reflect on that as well. And if you do see gender bias in the media as well as social media, which is, of course is another way that we're communicating with each other and getting information these days. Libby, did you want to jump in first?
Sure, I'll jump in. Well, I feel it is, you know, when there's racism, when there's homophobia, we name it. We're much more likely to name it. But interestingly, when it's sexism, we don't. And I've questioned myself about this many times, that why don't we as women in public life speak about it more? I've spoken to labor leaders who are women, I've spoken to elected representatives, community leaders, and they'll all tell you that they've experienced unbelievable bias and sexism. And yet, for some reason, we think we won, but we don't name it. So that in itself to me is interesting. But there are clearly differences, and the thing that I find infuriating is that it's not like it's one huge overt thing. It's sort of like 1,000 minor nuances that when they accumulate, you think, wow, like I'm really being treated differently. And I always wish, and I keep forgetting to write down individual examples, no matter how minor they are, just so you can have sort of a collection of at least anecdotal stuff. I've spoken to people like Alexa McDonough, who is the former woman leader of the NDP, Audrey McLaughlin, and as I say, labor leaders who were women, and they all say the same thing, that there's one that women are much more marginalized in the media, they're much more critical, and in some of these sort of debates, you know, if you're too aggressive, you're called shrill. Like, I've never heard a man called shrill. I'd really like to see that sometime. You know, it's okay to be assertive and aggressive if you're a man and you're getting in there, but if you go over some invisible line, and I don't even know what the line is, but if you go over it, all of a sudden you're characterized in this very female way that is actually very pejorative. So that would be one observation. I do think that we need a lot more research on this issue, so it isn't just anecdotal, and there are a few papers out there that I've read over the years that give some substance to this. I think it's a bigger issue related to politics generally and what happens to women in leadership roles, but it's definitely prevalent in the media, and I think it would be very interesting to connect it to women in the media as well, in terms of what their own experiences in their own professional environment, and to see what kind of intersection there is there. But to me, it is absolutely there. I feel like I contend with it a lot, and I feel like I'm someone who's pretty experienced with the media, and you know how to respond to it. But I do feel just these nuances of how I'm treated differently, and that there is sexism that's unfortunately alive and well there.
Elizabeth, you're new to public office, although not new to politics, and you had a long stint in advocacy, many column inches written about you, and hours on the news, evening news. Any perceptions about now that you're elected? Is there any difference, or what's the pattern that you've seen?
Well, and I'm chomping at the bit to start talking about the concentration of ownership and how biased our media is, but there's no question our media is sexist. The coverage of women in politics is very different than the coverage of men in politics, as Libby has said. I have to say that in the 17 years I was executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada, there was no difference whatsoever, as far as I could see, in how I was treated versus how Monty Hummel, as executive director of World Wildlife Fund, was treated, or how other men in leadership positions in the environment movement. The coverage of what I had to say was about what I had to say. But entering politics, it's the first time that, in a very long time, that I experienced sexism on an ongoing basis. And it's not just from reporters, it's the kind of thing that opposition members would say about you. I mean, the worst is Mike Duffy, who consistently calls me Bucky the Beaver, because apparently he finds fault with my dental work or lack thereof. So, but given his God-given physical perfection, I can understand why he casts stones on others. But the Adonis that he is, so there you are. I find it annoying. I think it's distracting. And as a woman in politics, I know I'm treated differently than men in politics. And Libby put her finger on it. Women are called shrill. Women are called, what a woman is aggressively pursuing an important goal, what in a man would be considered commitment, dedication, and leadership attributes, in women is considered just sort of embarrassing, really. Why is she doing all those things, really? So, I agree with Libby.
So Elizabeth, let me just follow up with you then. Do you see, I know you're very active on social media, do you see the same kind of gender bias in the people's media that you do in the corporate media?
Well, it's worse in the social media because it's anonymous and it's full of conservative trolls. So, I mean, nobody out loud...
Maybe even Mike Duffy.
No, I mean, nobody has said to me out loud to my face, gee, that woman needs to go on Jenny Craig. But it's a repeated comment in the Globe and Mail comment section. If it's rare enough, and speaking of the bias in the Globe and Mail, it extends to just about everything I care about. So their coverage of the Keystone Pipeline isn't grassroots victory against a dumb project. It's, oh, Canada-U.S. relations are in real trouble now. Because what? Because President Barack Obama listened to the constituents of his own country who don't want an unsafe pipeline crossing a major aquifer? I mean, the Globe and Mail, speaking of corporate conglomeration, Globe and Mail, Bell, CTV bias is palpable. So when you look at the Globe and Mail comment sections, or the National Post, or for that matter the Times Colonist, or any newspaper, except the Tyee, which very cleverly makes sure that the troll comments are edited out. You can talk to David Beers about how he does that. But it's a very nasty, scummy place. And it's part of, I'm convinced, part of voter suppression techniques to turn people off the pages where they might want to comment about what's going on in social media, those discussions, because they feel they'll be attacked themselves, which also happens. By making those pages anonymous, Twitter for the most part, I mean, I tweet a lot, and most of the comments back are very fair-minded, and they appreciate someone in politics who's honestly sharing what's going on. But the anonymity in the social media space, in terms of your one question, sexism, is much worse.
Right, Hedy, thoughts on gender bias in traditional, conventional media or corporate media and social media?
Well, I don't want to repeat what was already said because I agree with Elizabeth and Libby. It really came home to me actually during that cross-burning thing, and I was made to be a silly little liar. I was just some little female thing that lied. And that was what hurt me most of all, because I had come from a place where everyone had thought that I knew what I was doing, and the media all thought as a physician that I was fairly, I was up to date and I knew what I was talking about. And I can just say to you, it's in politics that it's bad. Because I remember when I was negotiating for the doctors of the BCME in 1991, 92, and I was a physician. Well, gee whiz, I was the greatest union leader since whatever, I spoke in everyone. I had things when she said, she speaks in full sentences, and she tells those guys how to do it in crisp English, but she just is so powerful. I was powerful. I was like, whoa, I was this woman who was just right there on the top of it. Then the day I became a politician, I was all of a sudden a liar. I was an automatic liar. If I was passionate, and I am a passionate person, if I go behind an issue or something, like I'm going for it, right? I get my homework done and I go after it. Then I'm emotional. Passionate people are emotional people if you're a woman. If you're a guy, you're back to he's committed, dedicated, brave, fearsome, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think that it was interesting that after the cross-burning incident, York University, 2 young women who were doing their PhD studies in media and gender actually wrote about my story, but they also added one on Jane Stewart, who was a minister at the time, and who was accused. I mean, I don't think I ever saw Jane's name following this period of time, that it didn't say Jane Billion-Dollar Boondoggle Stewart. That was her name, her middle name. Whereas the woman had just come into the portfolio. Anything that had happened wasn't about her, but the male minister who was there before her didn't have a single word said against him. She was all of a sudden it. And so they took both of us and they wrote their thesis on it and did a lot of work and felt that it was about gender. And in my instance, it was about racism because it was how dare an immigrant woman of color talk about racism? How dare she? So that piece was added onto mine, but it was about the treatment of women, and I've seen it. I mean, I remember when Libby and I were studying solicitation on a committee looking at it, and we wanted to go to Amsterdam and to Holland and to other places to visit. Well, there was Libby and I dressed up with little berets on, and the cartoon was about how we were going to do this for 10 cents an hour. It was disgusting. It was actually quite demeaning for the two of us to be talked about like that. There were men on the committee, not a single one of them was discussed. It was just Libby and I going off to Amsterdam with a little sign saying 10 cents an hour, cheap. Or was it 50 cents an hour? I don't know, I can't even remember. But it was, you know, that was the kind of stuff that happens. Sherry Graydon from BC here has written a great deal about media and women, and I would ask you to look at her. But I just wanted to quickly say that I have learned to develop a thick skin. I'm serious. I really don't care what people say about me anymore. I mean, I remember that, I mean, I go to Pride Parade, for most of you who are Vancouverites, you see me in Pride Parade. I'm a Trinidadian. Trinis dance before Lent on the streets in Carnival. We wear costumes and we dance in the street. So for me, this is my like Carnival moment, good old Trinidadian culture coming back in here. But I'll never forget one year, I wore, we're talking about weight here, I wore this thing, I was some lizard woman from the planet of whatever the heck, and I had all these tentacles coming out of me, and they were all stuffed with newspapers, so they were huge. And the media, social media are cruel. They are really cruel because no one holds them to accountability because of the anonymity, but also because they seem to take it one step further because they are not able to be charged. If you wrote that in the Vancouver-Centre, you wrote it in one of these things, there is a criminal code and Communications Act in which you can be made charged, liable, etc. Some guy decided that the reason I was wearing this, somebody went like, what was she? You know, there was all this call on media, what was she? And then this one said, have you ever seen her size? She's just trying to hide it all under this big thing of whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I guess I am an enormous woman who is trying to hide my size underneath all of these things. But that was a comment, and others picked it up, and it was just, that was it. And you know, there was a sense, a deep sense of people who use social media that they become cruel and mean. And I think people have to think about being cruel and mean. And there should be some way, and we should talk about that, about being held accountable for what you say, even though you can hide behind anonymity. It is not appropriate to behave in that manner to people just because we don't know who you are. And that is a source of bullying, and I have a bill right now on bullying, cyberbullying, because of all the thing about social media and cyber space is that if somebody pushes you around in the classroom, calls you faggot in the hallway, does whatever they need to do, you know, ugly or whatever, talking about your weight and stuff, you know, you go home, you're in a safe space, your friends and your parents are there to buffer. One day you grow up, you know, revenge, I always say the best revenge is success. And so you become successful, you become, and nobody says it. In social media now, that is there until the day you die. No matter where you go to live, in whatever country of the world, you look for a job, somebody Googles you or somebody looks for you, and there you are. At 12 you were the girl who slept